Now we've got one more control I want to look at restyling. We've done our buttons, we've done our checkboxes, our radio buttons. Now we're going to do a scroll bar. Let me go ahead and close my window, and I'm going to go ahead and add a scroll bar to my window. Now at the moment, I'm still editing the style for my thumb, so I need to make sure I go back to my main window. Otherwise, I'd be creating a scroll bar within the thumb of my control, and that's certainly asking for problems. So let me scope all the way up so I'm back in my window, and let's add a scroll bar. Now by default, scroll bars want to be tall as opposed to wide. When I edit the template of a scroll bar, take a look at what happens. I'm going to edit a copy because with a scroll bar it really is easier to use the WPF scroll bar instead of trying to create my own. Let me take a look at the grid, and the grid contains within it 2 repeat buttons and a part track. Now I could set the orientation of my scroll bar to horizontal, but the scroll bar has a bunch of functionality in it so that when the scroll bar is horizontal, it relays out everything in my control. That can be a little bit complicated, so I want to work with my scroll bar in its default state. Its default state right now is not what I want, so let me switch back up to the root and let me reposition my scroll bar so that I've got a vertical scroll bar instead of a horizontal one. Just going to grab the selection tool and resize it. Okay, now that I've got a scroll bar in its default state, this is going to be a lot easier to modify. Let me zoom in on that, and let's start working with it. I'm going to go back to the selection tool, right-click, and edit my template. Now, let's take a look at the pieces that I've got. I've got 2 repeat buttons, the top and the bottom, and the part track, which represents the center of the scroll bar. I can expand the part track, and I've got a decrease repeat button, an increase repeat button, and a thumb. The decrease and the increase repeat button work the same way they did back with the slider. So when I have the decrease repeat button, you can see that I've got that tiny region up at the top. For my increase repeat button, I've got that larger region down at the bottom. Once again, I don't want to modify these because this functionality is intact the way I want it. I want to go into the thumb though, and let's go ahead and modify it. Now I'm going to right-click it, I'm going to edit the control parts, and I'm going to edit a copy of my thumb. Once again, I'm going to go ahead and do it in the default document, and now I can see my thumb. I've got the Chrome, and the Chrome is something that we tend to get rid of, so I'm going to click it and delete it. Now I'll go ahead and add a grid. Now one of the things about working with the thumb is that the functionality of the scroll bar always knows how to widen and narrow the size of your thumb to whatever it needs. The only layout container you really shouldn't use here is a canvas. The canvas that doesn't have any concept of relaying out the controls based on size will end up with your controls getting clipped, moved around, and things like that. You really don't want that to happen. So I'm going to activate my grid, and I'm just going to add an ellipse to my grid. And you know, that's a bit too large. Let me go ahead and make that a little narrower. I'm going to copy it and paste it. I'm going to hold down the Shift key, move this ellipse over, copy it and paste it, hold down Shift, and just basically create myself a little line of circles here. Select all 3 of them, and move them over so they're more in the center. So now I've replaced my old thumb with a new, little more stylized thumb. If I press F5 now, you'll see that the scroll bar now has this new thumb, and it's got all the functionality of the old thumb like I wanted. And just like the other controls that we've worked with, I can go ahead and add property triggers, I can go ahead and add whatever functionality I want to this particular thumb. So let me go ahead, select the center one. I'm going to add a property trigger that when the target element is mouse over, I want my elements to turn red. Since all 3 of my ellipses were selected, I'm going to set the fill to red, and now all 3 will turn red when the mouse is over it. So now let me press F5 again. The ellipses at the moment are transparent, but as soon as my mouse gets close, they turn red, and as soon as my mouse leaves, they turn back to white. This is just another example of how you can combine the geometry editing, restyling the thumb, and working with the property triggers. The repeat buttons above and below the scroll bar work pretty much the same way. They are controls in and of themselves, so I'm going to right-click the repeat button, edit a copy of its template, repeat button style 1. Well, this is my up style, so I'm going to instead name it up, get rid of my Chrome, and this time to do something a little different, I'm going to add a border. Add my border to the scene, give it a solid border brush, and give it a border thickness on 3 sides of 3 pixels. Okay, that's looking like what I want. Let me double-click the border to make it activated, add a canvas to it, and use my pen tool to just create an upward arrow. There we go. So now I've gone ahead and created my own template for the repeat button. Okay, now I've got my template created. Let's go ahead and scope out. Let's select the other repeat button. I'm going to right-click it, edit the template, and this time I'm just going to apply the resource to my repeat button style up. Now it applies it, but it looks exactly identical to the one above it. That's not what I want. By applying it here, I've gone ahead and I'm using that style. Now when I copy it, it's going to take a copy of the repeat style up, and it'll be really easy for me to flip it over. So I'm going to edit a copy of it now and call this repeat button style down. So now my starting point, instead of being the standard Chrome, the starting point is my repeat button of this format. So now I'm just going to select the border, go into my transform property over in the property inspector, click on the flip tab, and flip it over. Now let's press F5, and I've got my newly styled scroll bar. I can click on it, and it moves my ellipses down. But I want to show you something else. When I click over here, the ellipses don't move. Why is that? This is actually talking a little bit about how events are handled, but what happens here is, at the moment, I'm not actually over any control. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to scope up. I'm going to go back to the repeat button on top, that was the one I was clicking on, and edit its template. If you look at the border and move up to the brushes, the background of the border is no brush, which means it has nothing in this area. When I move to my canvas, it also has a background of no brush. So as I go to each one of these steps, you'll see that there's actually nothing there. They all have a background with no brush. So when I click, I'm not actually reaching any control. To fix this, I'm going to take my canvas and give it a solid fill. But I don't want it to be solid. I still want it to be transparent. So I'm going to set the alpha to 0. So what's the difference here? When my background was set to no brush, there's physically no brush at that location. So I see through to the bottom and my clicks go down to the bottom. At this point, my background is a completely opaque brush. It's there, but it's invisible. Invisible means I can still click on it, even though it doesn't get displayed. Now watch when I press F5, I can click to that dead region to the right. Let me move down my ellipses. And it does the scrolling the way I want. This is important when you're working with controls like is mouse over, working with mouse clicks and so on. Always remember that a transparent brush can receive mouse events, where if there is no brush, those clicks are going to move down to whatever the child is. The techniques that we've explored here allow you to maintain the functionality of the controls, say a button that causes code to happen when it's clicked, but rewrite the entire visual aspect to get the look and even the behavior that you want as the user interacts with it.